Hello, this is Shmuel Moshe, and you are listening to the Weekly Parashahcast, a weekly Torah portion podcast where I review the weekly Torah portion, read it aloud, and then give my own interpretations based on my understanding of the text. This week's Torah portion is Yitro, and we'll be beginning right from the top. Now, before I begin, I'd like to always remind everybody I am not a professional Torah scholar, just somebody who wanted to study the Torah. You can follow along with this week's reading via Chabad.org, where I'll be taking my English translation. Let's go ahead and get started with Chapter 18 of Exodus, portion Yitro, also translated to Jethro. Verse 1. Now Moses' father-in-law Jethro, the chieftain of Midian, heard all that God had done for Moses and for Israel, his people that the Lord had taken out of Egypt. So Moses' father-in-law Jethro took Zipporah, Moses' wife, after she had been sent away, and her 2 sons, one of whom was named Gershom, because Moses said, I was a stranger in a foreign land, and one who was named Eliezer, because Moses said, the God of my father came to my aid and rescued me from Pharaoh's sword. Now Moses' father-in-law Jethro, and his sons, and his wife came to Moses, to the desert where he was encamped, to the mountain of God. And he said to Moses, I, Jethro, your father-in-law, am coming to you, and so is your wife and her 2 sons with her. So Moses went out toward Jethro, prostrated himself, and kissed him, and they greeted one another, and they entered the tent. Moses told his father-in-law about all that the Lord had done to Pharaoh and to the Egyptians on account of Israel, and about all the hardships that had befallen them on the way, and that the Lord had saved them. Jethro was happy about all the good the Lord had done for Israel, that he had rescued them from the hands of the Egyptians. Thereupon Jethro said, Blessed is the Lord, who has rescued you from the hands of the Egyptians, and from the hand of Pharaoh, who has rescued the people from beneath the hand of the Egyptians. Now I know that the Lord is greater than all the deities, for with the thing that they plotted, he came upon them. Then Moses' father-in-law, Jethro, sacrificed burnt offerings and peace offerings to God, and Aaron and all the elders of Israel came to dine with Moses' father-in-law before God. Thus concludes the first portion. So we get a visit from Moses' father-in-law, as well as his wife and 2 sons, right? So Moses' wife and children are there. And basically, Jethro is coming now after all this craziness. He's returning with Moses' family and meeting with Moses. And obviously, their relationship is a very, very good one. They meet each other in warm embrace, and they are happy to see one another. And Moses basically can tell this guy everything, as if he was, one of his kin. And he tells him that the Lord basically gave them all the deliverances they could have needed, that they've been through so much, but the Lord has provided. And Jethro, hearing this testimony, has no choice but to recognize that the God of the Israelites is the most powerful. And so he basically decides, okay, I'm going to make my offerings to that particular deity, because clearly that deity is number one. Beyond that, he also praises that Lord, and with Moses, Aaron and all the elders of Israel come to dine with him. So basically, long story short, this is a very well-respected man and one who has absolute piety. He's the chieftain of Midian, so he is not some small fry. He's a big deal. And this particular person has a very high degree of authority in his people. So it's almost like saying the king of another group of people has come and is kneeling before the Lord. Second portion, chapter 18, verse 13. It came about on the next day that Moses sat down to judge the people, and the people stood before Moses from the morning until the evening. When Moses' father-in-law saw what he was doing to the people, he said, What is this thing that you are doing to the people? Why do you sit by yourself while all the people stand before you from morning till evening? Moses said to his father-in-law, For the people come to me to seek God. If any of them has a case, he comes to me, and I judge between a man and his neighbor, and I make known the statutes of God and his teachings. Moses' father-in-law said to him, The thing you are doing is not good. You will surely wear yourself out, both you and these people who are with you, for the matter is too heavy for you. You cannot do it alone. Now listen to me. I will advise you, and may the Lord be with you. You represent the people before God, and you shall bring the matters to God, and you shall admonish them concerning the statutes and the teachings, and you shall make known to them the way they shall go and the deeds they shall do. But you shall choose out of the entire nation men of substance, God-fearers, men of truth who hate monetary gain, and you shall appoint over them, Israel, leaders of thousands, leaders over hundreds, leaders over fifties, and leaders over tens. And they shall judge the people at all times. And it shall be that any major matter they shall bring to you, and they themselves shall judge every minor matter, thereby making it easier for you, and they shall bear the burden with you. If you do this thing, and the Lord commands you, you will be able to survive. And also, all this people will come upon their place in peace. So now we hear at the end of the second portion, Jethro is a very, very wise man. He knows how to be a leader, and he also recognizes a critical flaw of how Moses does his own leadership. From morning to night, Moses basically sits down, arbitrates on behalf of the problems of people, goes to the Lord, gets the official answer, and then comes back and delivers the verdict. Now, the problem with this, as Jethro notices, he says, Moses, there's no way that you can do this every single day for every single problem that all the people of your nation have. This is just too much for one man. So rather than doing it all yourself, what you're going to do is you're going to establish a hierarchy of a court system. You are going to be the Supreme Court where you bring the most serious matters to God, but below you, you're going to appoint the most righteous people to be judges. You're going to create a judge system based on rulings over tens of people, hundreds of people, thousands of people, and when it's a serious enough issue, it will be brought to the highest level and brought to you. This will prevent you from being overworked and also prevent you from being unable to fulfill your duties. Furthermore, you're going to be able to be a better leader in general because you're not occupying your time with all the petty squabbles that people have. So in short, Moses, here's my advice, and may the Lord be with you. Make it easier on yourself. Assign a tier system, right? Go ahead and break up the work so that you've given official designation of this problem goes to this judge and only the highest problems come to me. And so in doing so, Jethro has given some of the most powerful wisdom he could have given, and it clearly will have a massive impact, but also the qualities of those judges, just to make a note. Men of substance, God-fearers, men of truth who hate monetary gain. So these are essentially incorruptible people is the real meaning of that list, right? Because all those different things. Men of truth, so in other words, they don't lie. They will pursue the truth. God-fearers, which means that they'll put God before any other verdict. Men of substance, so they actually have depth to them, and they're intelligent or have qualities. Hate monetary gain, you can't be bribed. So as you can see, this is a very good list of qualities to have for a judge. And this list is pretty well maintained today, assuming you are in a non-separated church and state sort of environment, right? So anyway, let's go ahead and move on to the third portion. Exodus chapter 18, verse 24. Moses obeyed his father-in-law, and he did all that he said. Moses chose men of substance out of all of Israel, and appointed them as heads of the people, leaders of thousands, leaders of hundreds, leaders of fifties, and leaders of tens. And they would judge the people at all times. The difficult case they would bring to Moses, but any minor case they themselves would judge. Moses saw his father-in-law off, and he went away to his land. Simple, short portion. The explanation, Moses did exactly what Jethro advised him to do, and after this, sure enough, they start doing their judgments accordingly based on their different numbers of people, and if it's a serious enough problem, they bring it to Moses, otherwise they handle it themselves. With this, Jethro leaves. So after everything and after this sage advice, he must return to his own people. He returns to the land of Midian, but he does so in peace. He does so having made a great, valuable contribution to the people. And he, of course, it says he just leaves, so it doesn't say that he left with the family. It's just he goes back on his own. So essentially his role was to bring Moses' family to him, and that shows the merit. There's so much to be said about Jethro from the minute he's introduced in the stories to now. From when he first met Moses, right, seeing to it that he must reward the man who took care of his daughters, and now also seeing to it that the man is reunited with his wife and children. It is not uncommon for these people to keep their children and grandchildren, right? Laban, he wanted to keep his family, even though they were married off to Jacob. So it just shows what kind of a man that Jethro is and his wisdom as a sage. Even though Moses is considered to be such a sage himself and he has these direct rulings from the Lord, Jethro is just a more experienced leader in a number of other respects, and he shares that wisdom and really brings it to the next level for Moses in order to help create a more stable and sustainable hierarchical judgment system. In any case, farewell, Jethro. On to the fourth portion, chapter 19, verse 1. In the 3rd month of the children of Israel's departure from Egypt, on this day they arrived at the desert of Sinai. They journeyed from Rephidim, and they arrived in the desert of Sinai, and they encamped in the desert, and Israel encamped there opposite the mountain. Moses ascended to God, and the Lord called to him from the mountain, saying, So shall you say to the house of Jacob, and tell the sons of Israel, You have seen what I did to the Egyptians, and how I bore you on eagle's wings, and I brought you to me. And now, if you obey me and keep my covenant, you shall be to me a treasure out of all peoples, for mine is the entire earth. And you shall be to me a kingdom of princes and a holy nation. These are the words that you shall speak to the children of Israel. And so, fourth portion, also quite short, they arrive in Sinai, the desert of Sinai, right? Not Mount Sinai just yet, but they move, and then they get in the desert of Sinai, encamp in the desert, and there they are opposite the mountain. Moses rises up, and basically the Lord gives him a heads up. Listen, you're going to tell them this. You've seen what I can do. You've seen how I've taken care of you. Keep our arrangements, honor our covenant, and I will elevate you. I will treasure you. You will be princes and a holy nation. Make sure you tell that to them, Moses. Got it? Okay. So the fifth portion begins on chapter 19 of Exodus, verse 7. Moses came and summoned the elders of Israel, and placed before them all these words that the Lord had commanded him. And all the people replied in unison and said, All that the Lord has spoken we shall do. And Moses took the words of the people back to the Lord. And the Lord said to Moses, Behold, I am coming to you in the thickness of the cloud, in order that the people hear when I speak to you, and they will also believe in you forever. And Moses relayed the words of the people to the Lord. And the Lord said to Moses, Go to the people, and prepare them today and tomorrow, and they shall wash their garments. And they shall be prepared for the 3rd day, for on the 3rd day the Lord will descend before the eyes of all the people upon Mount Sinai. And you shall set boundaries for the people around, saying, Beware of ascending the mountain or touching its edge. Whoever touches the mountain shall surely be put to death. No hand shall touch it, for he shall be stoned or cast down. Whether a man or beast, he shall not live. When the ram's horn sounds a long drawn-out blast, they may ascend the mountain. So Moses descended from the mountain to the people, and he prepared the people, and they washed their garments. He said to the people, Be ready for 3 days. Do not go near a woman. It came to pass on the 3rd day, when it was morning, that there were thunderclaps and lightning flashes, and a thick cloud was upon the mountain, and a very powerful blast of a shofar, and the entire nation that was in the camp shuddered. Moses brought the people out toward God from the camp, and they stood at the bottom of the mountain. And the entire Mount Sinai smoked, because the Lord had descended upon it in fire, and its smoke ascended like the smoke of the kiln, and the entire mountain quaked violently. The sound of the shofar grew increasingly stronger. Moses would speak, and God would answer him with a voice. Powerful fifth portion, right? Fifth portion, very strong. So Moses relays the message to the people of Israel. Their response is, We agree to the terms. All that the Lord has spoken, we shall do. So, with that confirmation, Moses goes back to the Lord and says they agree. At this point, the Lord tells them that they should go prepare themselves and wash their garments and be prepared and so on. I'm going to come down to the mountain on the 3rd day. Do not touch the mountain. Do not go past these boundaries. Otherwise, you'll die. Doesn't matter if it's a man or an animal, it's going to be killed. And only when you hear a long, drawn-out blow of the shofar horn may you climb the mountain. So he tells everybody, and specifically in verse 15, he said to the people, Be ready for 3 days, do not go near a woman. Interesting. So what is the significance of that? Why is he telling them not to go near a woman? Well, there are a number of possible interpretations, right? They are supposed to be cleaning themselves, bathing themselves in being purified, sanctified before making this appearance. The idea of them going near a woman means that they would be quite possibly involved in some sort of carnal matters, which would certainly not keep them clean, right? If their body was performing sexual acts, that would certainly be something to consider. The other thing is the possibility of a woman being on her cycle, right? And so that's another thing to consider is there are several passages about the cleanliness and spiritual purity of a person who is or is not, a woman who's on her cycle is not considered to be spiritually clean for a man to go near because of whatever the reason may be. That's just the ruling, right? So a woman should be left in her own peace and privacy during that time of the month, and men should not interfere with her or mingle with her so she can have that privacy and things of that nature. Now, the other thing, which I think is very interesting, I think about it like this. If you've ever seen the Rocky movies, right, it's a quote, "Women make weak legs," or something to that effect, right? So Mick tells Rocky, don't fool around with your woman while you're training because women make weak legs. So in other words, Rocky has to train for this match, and that means no fooling around with his lady because that makes you weaker in the general interpretation of what Mick means by that, right? So in a sense, maybe it's the same deal. These people are supposed to be at the heightened level of spiritual preparedness for the Lord. But if they're distracted by a woman, they're going to have weak legs. So I think that may also be why Moses specifically gives this ruling. Note, it is not the word of the Lord that specifically says, don't go near a woman. That's Moses saying it. And so I think this is also just Moses himself making that ruling, knowing the way men can be swayed or caused to err because of their fixation on the opposite sex. So now that we've covered all of that, and that single line I really focused on a lot, the rest of it follows as planned. The mountain is an absolute chaotic mess of lightning and thunder, and there's fire, and it's horrific almost. It's so awesome, literally awesome. Like, it invokes awe and fear. They look at it in absolute awe and wonder, and they tremble. So, the entire nation that was in the camp shuddered. Like, it's scary. This is the awesome power of their God. And the sound of the shofar would blow, right? The mountain is clearly encompassing the Lord's presence. The Lord is encompassing the mountain. He's descended in this fire, and the smoke of like the kiln, just whole mountain's quaking. So yes, the sound of the shofar, very powerful, very strong. Moses would speak, God would answer him with a voice. Now, interestingly, the significance here is that all the people are going to hear it, right? So before, it was often Moses would just relay the information. But this instance, the Lord is appearing before the whole congregation so that all of them will both hear and see God, and they will trust that Moses has been telling the truth and will always tell the truth because this powerful deity is the one who Moses communes with and is the one that they're dealing with. So don't fool around. All right, now you know. Sixth portion, chapter 19, verse 20 of Exodus. The Lord descended upon Mount Sinai to the peak of the mountain, and the Lord summoned Moses to the peak of the mountain, and Moses ascended. The Lord said to Moses, Go down, warn the people, lest they break their formation to go nearer to the Lord, to see, and many of them will fall. And also the priests who go near the Lord shall prepare themselves, lest the Lord wreak destruction upon them. And Moses said to the Lord, The people cannot ascend to Mount Sinai, for you warned us, saying, Set boundaries for the mountain, and sanctify it. But the Lord said to him, Go, descend, and then you shall ascend, and Aaron with you, but the priests and the populace shall not break their formation to ascend to the Lord, lest he wreak destruction upon them. So Moses went down to the people and said this to them. Chapter 20, verse 1. God spoke all these words to respond. I am the Lord your God, who took you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. You shall not have the gods of others in my presence. You shall not make for yourself a graven image or any likeness which is in the heavens above, which is on the earth below, or which is in the water beneath the earth. You shall neither prostrate yourself before them, nor worship them, for I, the Lord your God, am a zealous God, who visits the iniquity of the fathers upon the sons, upon the third and the fourth generation of those who hate me, And I perform loving kindness to thousands of generations to those who love me, and to those who keep my commandments. You shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain, for the Lord will not hold blameless anyone who takes his name in vain. Remember the Sabbath day to sanctify it. 6 days may you work and perform all your labor, but the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. You shall perform no labor, neither you, your son, your daughter, your manservant, your maidservant, your beast, nor your stranger who is in your cities. For in 6 days the Lord made the heaven and the earth, and the sea and all that is in them, and he rested on the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and sanctified it. Honor your father and your mother, in order that your days be lengthened on the land that the Lord your God is giving you. You shall not murder, you shall not commit adultery, you shall not steal, you shall not bear false witness against your neighbor, you shall not covet your neighbor's house, you shall not covet your neighbor's wife, his manservant, his maidservant, his ox, his donkey, or whatever belongs to your neighbor. Thus concludes the sixth portion and the 10 Commandments. So here we have it. Moses has a conversation with the Lord, and the Lord warns him, telling him, go down and tell everybody, don't break your formation. Don't you do it. Don't come up to me, or you're going to perish. And Moses says, well, don't worry about it, Lord. Not a problem. We created an entire barrier to stop them from being able to do so. But he says to him, go descend, and then you shall ascend, but the priests and populace shall not break their formation. Don't you do it. And so it's interesting because there's this recurring emphasis, right? Even though they've created a barrier, they've erected a barricade of some kind to stop them from climbing up, the Lord still tells Moses, tell them anyway. Why? Well, we have no shortage of examples of plenty of reasons not to do something. We have plenty of barriers before us, but yet people often do the thing anyway, don't they? So once again, he is just really emphasizing here to Moses, you need to tell them, do not follow, do not come up, don't risk it, they're going to perish. We cannot have that, okay? So make sure they know. And this emphasis, again, it shows the awareness that is known of human nature, and also the compassion that the Lord has to tell them this, be like, make sure they don't do it, they will be destroyed, havoc will be wreaked upon them, do not do it. Okay, make sure they know. So Moses obeys, and he goes down. He's going to come with Aaron, but the priests and the populace don't break formation. Don't do it. So he goes down and he says to this congregation with the chapter 20 lines, God spoke all these words to respond, I'm the Lord, etc., etc. So we have all of the different commandments, right? So the first is who I am your God. Don't have the gods of others in my presence. So if you have like somebody with you who has another god that they worship, don't even bring him near me. Don't even bring him near me. Not in my presence. Don't make a graven image or likeness, which is in the heavens above, on the earth below, or in the waters beneath the earth. So basically this says don't carve the likeness of things, which is definitely a challenge. I once heard someone ask, so why don't the ancient Hebrews have any sort of statues or monuments, huh? Like all these other civilizations had them. So why is there no art of the ancient Hebrews that's chiseled? And this is the obvious answer. It's forbidden to do so, right? So don't make a graven image or likeness, which is in the heavens above, on the earth below, or in the water beneath the earth. So basically, don't create a likeness of anything that exists in those three planes. You shall neither prostrate yourself before them, nor worship them. So, in other words, these are idols that we're talking about. Idols that are likenesses of a thing. So, it could be an idol of a person or an animal or whatever, right? But don't bow before them and don't worship them. I am the Lord your God. I am a zealous God. And basically also, I will deliver punishment not just on the one who does it, but for the third and fourth generation, they also will feel the consequences. But those who perform good things for me, who worship me, who keep my commandments, loving kindness for thousands of generations. So that's the deal, right? If you do bad, 3 to 4 generations are going to suffer. But if you do good, 1,000+ will benefit. You shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain. So basically, just don't do that ever. Not a single person will be exempt from punishment for doing this. Remember the Sabbath day to sanctify it. Pretty straightforward. So here's a full breakdown of what's required on the Sabbath. It is a Sabbath to the Lord. So do no labor, not you, your children, your family, your servants, your animals, nobody, not even the guy who's not from here but who's visiting, not even him. Nobody's allowed to do work on that day. Why? Because 6 days of creation, seventh day of rest. Honor your parents, in order that your days be lengthened on the land that the Lord your God is giving you. So in other words, he's saying you'll live longer by honoring your mother and father. And if you really think about it in a most broad text, right, by showing your children that you respect your parents, that you will take care of your parents, you will honor your parents, right? They live longer, right? Because think about it, some people I'm sure have seen this before, right? You have a family member who is beloved, and they get older, but the family still looks out for them, still honors them, still takes care of them, and they live longer. Typically, they actually get a little bit of extra life than they might have had if they were on their own. So by doing this and setting this as a statute, not only do you honor your parents, but when it's your turn to be the elder, ideally, your children are going to do the same for you, and it's going to lengthen your days. But also, the Lord is saying that, it'll lengthen your days by honoring your parents. So I think also this is a matter of conduct. You also honor your parents by behaving yourself appropriately. So by doing things that will honor your mother and father, you will be avoiding things that would dishonor them, which typically can lead to things like death. So something to keep in mind. You shall not murder, do not commit adultery, do not steal, and do not bear false witness against your neighbor. This is all in a single verse, verse 13. All four of those. So murdering, adultering, stealing, or bearing false witness. Okay? All very bad. And also the key word is murder. It doesn't say kill, it's murder. There is a difference between killing and murdering. Killing does not have the same connotation. Maybe you're in war. That's a good example. There are times where killing is not considered murder. Then there is murder, where you're just robbing someone of life. Adultery, right? Immoral behavior. So that is an immoral sexual relation, forbidden relation. Worse than stealing is adultery, all right? And there's a spiritual, think about it. It's the next thing after it is murder, or murder and then adultery. So the only thing higher on the list of bad behavior is murdering. That's pretty bad. Like that means adultery is pretty bad. It means adultery is worse than stealing, worse than lying. And then the last one, bearing or coveting your neighbor's house, jealousy, right? Coveting what someone else has. Like, don't covet your neighbor's belongings. So don't sit there wanting what someone else has for yourself. Don't wish it was yours, because that leads to the other sins. So just don't do it. Keep to your own things. Quite a powerful list of commandments. The 10 Commandments are, by most people, I think, recognized. Well, yeah, I at least follow the 10 Commandments. Do you? Do you follow the Sabbath? Do you not worship any graven images? Are you sure? It doesn't say idols. It doesn't specify any language other than a graven image in the likeness of anything on earth, heaven, or sea. It doesn't matter what you mean by it. Graven image of anything in the earth, heaven, or sea, any likeness. If you make something that looks like a person, thing, etc., and you pray before it, that is a violation of the commandment. Just something to keep in mind. Seventh portion, chapter 20, verse 15. And all the people saw the voices and the torches, the sound of the shofar, and the smoking mountain. And the people saw and trembled, so they stood from afar. They said to Moses, You speak with us, and we will hear, but let God not speak with us, lest we die. But Moses said to the people, Fear not, for God has come in order to exalt you, and in order that his awe shall be upon your faces, so that you shall not sin. So the people remained far off, but Moses drew near to the opaque darkness where God was. The Lord said to Moses, So shall you say to the children of Israel, You have seen that from the heavens I have spoken with you. You shall not make images of anything that is with me. Gods of silver or gods of gold you shall not make for yourselves. An altar of earth you shall make for me, and you shall slaughter beside it your burnt offerings and your peace offerings, your sheep and your cattle. Wherever I allow my name to be mentioned, I will come to you and bless you. And when you make for me an altar of stones, you shall not build them of hewn stones, lest you wield your sword upon it and desecrate it. And you shall not ascend with steps upon my altar, so that your nakedness shall not be exposed upon it. So, the final portion for this week, portion 7, starting at chapter 20, verse 15. So it's interesting. All the people saw the voices and the torches, right? The sound of the shofar and the smoking mountain. And the people saw and trembled, so they stood from afar. The key word is saw, right? So it's not heard the voices. They saw these things. There's a condition or ability called synesthesia, and it's the ability to see sound or you see music like in colors and stuff like that. It's something to that effect. It's like a visual representation of music, synesthesia, right? And so this allows certain people to kind of tap into that sense because they can see music, not just hear it, but they see it. So I think that's a similar interpretation of what is going on here. It's not just that they are hearing the voice of God, they are seeing the voice of God. They are having their own kind of synesthesia, as if the sound waves themselves are the words floating through the sky, telling them the information, transmitting the information. This is real power. All of the senses are activated at once. The sound of the shofar, the smoking mountain. They saw and trembled, so they stood from afar. They stepped away. They were afraid. They outright asked Moses, "You tell us, we'll hear it from you, but let God not be the one to tell us directly, right? Lest we die." They're afraid that this awesome power is going to kill them. So Moses, why don't you be the middleman and let us be away? But Moses tells them, don't be afraid. Don't be afraid. God has come in order to exalt you, and in order that his awe shall be upon your faces, so that you shall not sin. In other words, he's here to scare you straight. He's here to elevate you. And by putting this experience before you, you're going to be too afraid to ever sin. Okay, great. The people remained far off, but Moses drew near to the opaque darkness where God was. The Lord said to Moses, right, so you say to the children of Israel, you have seen from the heavens, I have spoken with you. So once again, reiterating, you have seen that from the heavens I have spoken with you. So this is a testament, right? The testimony, they are witnesses, eyewitnesses. You have witnessed that I have spoken to you from the heavens. So gods and silver and gold, don't do it. Do not make images of anything. You shall not make images of anything that is with me, right? So don't create images in my likeness. Don't create anything that looks like me or that looks like the things that are around me. Do not create physical embodiments of the thing, because that is not what I'm telling you to do. You can make for me an altar of the earth, slaughter beside it. Wherever I allow my name to be mentioned, I will come to you and bless you. When you make for me an altar of stones, you shall not build them of hewn stones. So in other words, when you build me an altar of stones, use natural stone. Don't try to chisel it. Don't try to fashion it. Don't try to fix it to some kind of way, lest you wield your sword upon it and desecrate it, right? So in other words, you laying your weapons upon the stone is actually going to risk desecrating the altar. So don't do it, okay? Don't do it. And you shall not ascend with steps upon my altar, so that your nakedness shall not be exposed upon it. So I believe with this, the significance is your nakedness, steps, right? And I assume ascend with steps means like a staircase, right? Once again, using the Rocky example, Rocky runs up the staircase to the Philadelphia Museum of Art, and at the very top, if you're at the bottom, you're looking up at him, jumping up and down. Your nakedness. Remember that during this time period, what were people wearing? They were wearing robes. So if somebody is watching you climb up some steps and there's a breeze that goes by, they might look up your robe and then your nakedness will be exposed. So don't climb up. It's just make an altar of the earth, of clay, whatever it may be, or of stones. Don't chisel the stones. Don't strike the stones. Just put them in there, raw stone, and don't ascend so that you'll be exposed with nudity. So there you have it, the conclusion, these very specific rulings. And I think it makes it a lot easier for people to create altars to the Lord. There's no gatekeeping of, well, you must be an artisan. No. If you're going to make an altar, it's just going to be made out of the earth. All right, so just take some soil or some rock, right? And when you make an altar of stones, don't take hewn stones, just take the rocks and build a nice little altar. So that really makes it very simple. We're not making it complex. And also, this not only prevents them from desecrating it, but I think this is really important because it prevents people from abusing the ability to say, well, we control the stonemasons, and therefore, they're the ones who get to make the altar. You can't make one. But also, actually, that's an interesting idea too, right? You shall not make them hewn stone. So saying the word stonemason just made me remember the Tower of Babel. They were building this tower, and they were making bricks and all this stuff. And so this altar, the same idea, right? If they get too crafty with their brickwork, there could be trouble. So instead, keep it simple. Use natural stone. Don't desecrate the earth. Use something natural. Use that to honor me. And I think that's also just a way of preventing a repetition of something like that, where they create. I think it's also a risk of when you start fashioning stones and fashioning your materials. So you notice, like, when somebody creates something, they'll often start to get kind of, let me get my own little spin on that. And then they start to get extra creative, and then they start embellishing it. And suddenly you just turned what was a normal rock into a rock that has a Mount Rushmore face on it, right? So I think that's also part of the concern there, is by keeping it simple, you don't run the risk of desecration. You simply have the rocks, you make them work. Beautiful. With that, we've concluded this week's weekly Torah portion, Parashat Yitro, or Jethro. What a powerful, this might be the most important one, and it's named not after a Hebrew, it's named after a father-in-law from Midian, whose wisdom is absolutely invaluable to the people of Israel. All is wonderful with his advice helping Moses along. And then, of course, we have the incredibly powerful Ten Commandments delivery, which is a permanent memory upon the people of Israel for all time. If you follow just 10 rules, make them these. And then, of course, these other rules relating to how worship is done and things of that nature. So really cannot emphasize enough the significance of don't do these things, period. The reason I emphasize that again is we know that in time, the people are going to explicitly do the things where they were told not to do. So we'll talk more about that in the future. But for now, that is the end of this week's portion. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you found it educational. And I ask everybody, did you know the 10 Commandments? Do you actually know them before hearing today? Have you always been able to remember the 10? That's a pretty good test for people who claim to be religious or want to be religious, right? Do you know the 10 Commandments? This has been Shmuel Moshe. Baruch Hashem.